A humid late afternoon, yellow light on the courthouse stained glass windows, motionless fans. A handcuffed police officer is led down the long corridor, turns left and enters the overcrowded room. He is now the defendant, wrinkled suit, tired face. In the background, cameras and microphones motionless as blades. The judge hurries the reading. The prosecution piles up dossiers. The defense doesn't react. The gavel hovers 2 centimeters from the base. In the hall, a German shepherd waits next to the metal detector, ears raised, snout turned towards the door. The security guard hesitates and takes half a step back. The passage remains open. The defendant remains motionless. The dog dashes down the corridor, crosses the line of reporters, pushes the door, and drops a folded letter at the lawyer's feet. The paper scrapes the wood. Fingers touch the seal. The gavel freezes in the air. For a second, nothing moves. Do you love stories with animals? Then subscribe now and don't miss any. Thanks for joining us. Now, we return to our story. The Hartford County Courthouse was packed beyond capacity, every wooden bench filled with spectators who had come to witness what the local newspapers were calling the trial of the decade. The air hung thick with tension, so palpable you could almost touch it. Detective Michael Harrison, a man who had spent 15 years walking the beat and protecting the streets of Hartford and Connecticut, now found himself sitting at the defendant's table, surrounded by accusations that painted him as a betrayer of everything he had sworn to uphold. The media presence was overwhelming. Camera flashes illuminated the courtroom like lightning strikes, while reporters scribbled frantically in their notebooks, eager to capture every moment of what many believed would be a swift fall from grace. The detective's uniform, which had once been a symbol of honor and service, now felt like a weight pressing down on his shoulders. Every glance from the gallery seemed to carry judgment, as if the verdict had already been decided long before Judge Robert Sterling would read it aloud. Sarah Mitchell, Harrison's defense attorney, sat rigidly beside him, her usually confident demeanor showing cracks of concern. She had handled high-profile cases before, but something about this one felt different. The evidence presented by District Attorney Patricia Coleman seemed meticulously crafted, leaving no room for doubt or alternative interpretations. Documents, signature records, contradictory testimonies, everything pointed toward a single, damaging narrative that suggested Detective Harrison had not merely failed in his duties, but had actively participated in schemes that compromised his career and integrity. Your Honor, District Attorney Coleman began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never lost a case of this magnitude. The evidence will show that Detective Harrison violated the public trust in the most egregious manner possible. She gestured toward a stack of folders on the prosecution table, each one seemingly containing another piece of the puzzle that would seal Harrison's fate. The detective remained silent, his weathered hands folded on the table before him. Years of police work had taught him to observe, to notice the details others might miss. And as he sat there, listening to the charges being read, something nagged at him about the whole proceeding. The documents looked official, the testimonies seemed consistent, but there were small inconsistencies that bothered him. Dates that didn't quite align, signatures that appeared rushed, records that seemed to have been created in haste. Judge Sterling, a man known for his no-nonsense approach to justice, appeared unusually eager to move the proceedings along. Every time Sarah Mitchell attempted to raise questions about the evidence's authenticity, she was curtly interrupted. "Counselor, we need to maintain the pace of this trial," the judge would say, tapping his gavel with increasing frequency. His behavior struck many in the courtroom as odd, particularly the veteran court reporters who had covered his cases for years. The first day of testimony painted a grim picture. Witness after witness took the stand, each one adding another layer to the prosecution's case. Former colleagues spoke of suspicious behavior. Administrative assistants testified about irregular paperwork. and supervisors described meetings that supposedly took place in shadowy circumstances. With each testimony, the crowd's murmurs grew louder, and Detective Harrison could feel the weight of their disapproval settling over him like a heavy blanket. Sarah Mitchell fought valiantly to poke holes in the prosecution's narrative, but every attempt was met with objections that Judge Sterling seemed all too eager to sustain. The defense table began to feel like an island of isolation in a sea of accusation and judgment. Harrison's colleagues from the Hartford Police Department sat in the gallery, their faces showing a mixture of disappointment and betrayal that cut deeper than any formal charge ever could. As the afternoon wore on, the prosecution called its star witness, Captain James Brennan, Harrison's former supervisor. Brennan's testimony was devastating in its precision. He spoke of late-night meetings, unexplained absences, and behavioral changes that he now claimed were obvious signs of corruption. The courtroom hung on his every word, and even Sarah Mitchell seemed to struggle with how to counter such damaging testimony from someone who had worked closely with her client. Detective Harrison had been acting strangely for months, Brennan testified, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came with 25 years of service. There were discrepancies in his reports, meetings he claimed to have attended but had no record of, and a general change in his demeanor that concerned several of us in the department. The day's proceedings concluded with the judge's gavel echoing through the silent courtroom. As people began to file out, Harrison could hear the whispered conversations, the speculative comments about guilt and corruption. The media rushed to get quotes from anyone willing to talk, while the detective sat motionless, absorbing the magnitude of what he faced. Sarah Mitchell leaned over to speak with her client as the courtroom emptied. "Michael, I need you to understand the gravity of this situation. They've built what appears to be an airtight case. If there's anything you haven't told me, anything at all that might help us understand what's really happening here, now is the time." Harrison looked at his attorney with tired eyes that had seen too much over the years. "Sarah, I've been straight with you from the beginning. Something about all this feels orchestrated, like I'm not just facing accusations, but something much bigger. The timing, the evidence, the way everyone seems so eager to see this wrapped up quickly. It doesn't sit right." Outside the courthouse, protesters had gathered with signs demanding justice and accountability. The community that Harrison had served for so many years now seemed to view him as a symbol of everything wrong with law enforcement. Local news stations broadcast live reports, with anchors speculating about the trial's outcome and its implications for the Hartford Police Department. That evening, as Harrison sat in his modest apartment, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was merely a pawn in a much larger game. The evidence against him was substantial, but something about its presentation felt too perfect, too convenient. He thought about his years of service, the cases he had solved, the people he had helped, and wondered how it had all led to this moment. The phone rang several times, but he didn't answer. Friends and family members had been trying to reach him since the trial began, but he wasn't ready to face their questions or their attempts at comfort. The weight of the accusation sat heavy on his chest, making it difficult to breathe, difficult to think clearly about what his next move should be. As night fell over Hartford, Detective Michael Harrison stared out his window at the city lights, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of testimony. Another day of watching his reputation and career crumble before his eyes. He had no idea that forces beyond his understanding were already in motion, or that an unlikely ally would soon change the course of everything he thought he knew about his case. The stage was set for a battle that would test not only his innocence, but the very foundations of justice in Hartford County. What none of them knew was that truth has a way of surfacing, even when powerful forces try to keep it buried, and that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected sources. The second day of the trial dawned grey and overcast, matching the somber mood that had settled over Hartford County. Detective Harrison arrived at the courthouse earlier than necessary, hoping to avoid the growing crowd of media personnel and protesters that had gathered outside. The morning newspapers had been brutal in their coverage, with headlines that seemed to have already convicted him in the court of public opinion. Sarah Mitchell met him at the defendant's entrance, her briefcase bulging with documents she had spent the entire night reviewing. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed the lack of sleep, but her determination remained unwavering. "Michael, I've been going through the prosecution's evidence again, and I'm noticing some inconsistencies, small things, but they might be important." As they walked through the courthouse corridors, Harrison noticed how differently people treated him now. Court officers who had once greeted him warmly now avoided eye contact. Administrative staff who had known him for years suddenly found pressing work that required their immediate attention. The transformation was as swift as it was painful. Judge Sterling entered the courtroom with his usual authoritative bearing. But Sarah Mitchell noticed something different about his demeanor. He seemed more impatient than usual, frequently checking his watch and displaying a level of irritation that was uncharacteristic for someone known for his measured approach to justice. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Coleman, appeared supremely confident as they prepared to present more evidence. "Your Honor, we call Detective Patricia Williams to the stand," Coleman announced. Detective Williams had been Harrison's partner for 3 years, and her testimony was expected to be particularly damaging. As she walked to the witness stand, Harrison felt a knot form in his stomach. Patricia had been more than just a partner. She had been a friend, someone he had trusted with his life on multiple occasions. Williams's testimony began predictably, with the prosecution establishing her credentials and her professional relationship with the defendant. But as she continued, her account of events seemed oddly rehearsed, as if she had memorized specific phrases and talking points. Sarah Mitchell made careful notes, recognizing the mechanical quality of the testimony that suggested coaching. "Detective Williams, can you describe Detective Harrison's behavior during the incidents in question?" Coleman asked, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who knew the answer would be favorable to her case. "Yes, ma'am. Michael began exhibiting unusual patterns approximately 6 months ago. He would arrive late to briefings, sometimes claiming to have attended meetings that weren't on any official schedule. His paperwork became sloppy, and he seemed distracted during our patrols." Sarah Mitchell stood to cross-examine. "Detective Williams, you and Detective Harrison were partners for 3 years, correct?" "Yes, that's correct." "And during those 3 years, would you describe him as a dedicated officer?" Williams hesitated for a moment, and Sarah caught the brief flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Yes, he was generally considered dedicated." "Generally. Detective Williams, in your 3 years as partners, did Detective Harrison ever compromise a case due to negligence or misconduct?" "Not directly. No." Sarah pressed further. "Detective Williams, you mentioned irregular meetings. Did you ever attempt to verify these meetings or ask Detective Harrison about them directly?" Again, Williams hesitated. "I assumed if he said he was at a meeting, he was at a meeting." "So you never actually investigated these supposed irregularities that you now claim were so concerning?" District Attorney Coleman objected, but Judge Sterling's response surprised everyone in the courtroom. Instead of his usual quick ruling, he paused, seeming to weigh the question more carefully than he had been doing. "Overruled. The witness may answer." This unexpected ruling caught Coleman off guard, and for the first time since the trial began, she showed a flash of uncertainty. Williams looked uncomfortable as she answered, "No, I never investigated them personally." As the morning progressed, Sarah Mitchell continued to find small but significant cracks in the prosecution's seemingly solid case. Witnesses couldn't provide specific dates for incidents they claimed to remember vividly. Documents that were supposed to be official records showed inconsistencies in formatting and timing. Most importantly, several witnesses seemed to be reciting prepared answers rather than recalling actual memories. During the lunch recess, Sarah pulled Harrison aside in a private conference room. "Michael, something is very wrong with this case. The evidence is too neat. Too convenient. It's as if someone has been building a narrative around you rather than uncovering actual wrongdoing." Harrison nodded grimly. "I've been thinking the same thing. Some of these incidents they're describing, I can remember where I actually was during those times, and it wasn't where they're claiming, but without proof, it's just my word against theirs. That's what bothers me most," Sarah continued. "In most cases like this, there are gray areas, ambiguous situations that can be interpreted multiple ways. But their version of events is black and white, with no room for alternative explanations. That's not how real investigations work." Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, public opinion continued to shift against Detective Harrison. Local news stations ran continuous coverage, with legal experts analyzing every moment of the trial. Social media buzzed with commentary, most of it unfavorable to the defendant. The Hartford Police Department had issued statements distancing themselves from Harrison, and several community leaders had called for swift justice. But not everyone was convinced. Officer Rebecca Torres, one of Harrison's former colleagues, sat in the gallery during the afternoon session, watching the proceedings with growing skepticism. She had worked with Harrison on numerous cases and had never seen anything that would suggest the kind of misconduct being described. As she listened to the testimony, she began to notice the same inconsistencies that were troubling Sarah Mitchell. The afternoon brought more damaging testimony, but Sarah Mitchell's cross-examinations were becoming increasingly effective. She was able to establish that several witnesses had met with prosecution representatives multiple times before testifying, and that their accounts had evolved significantly from their initial statements. Judge Sterling's reluctance to allow these lines of questioning was becoming more apparent, drawing subtle but noticeable reactions from the gallery. District Attorney Coleman called her final witness of the day, Administrative Assistant Linda Chen, who worked in the records department. Chen's testimony was supposed to establish the authenticity of the documents that formed the backbone of the prosecution's case. But as she spoke, Sarah Mitchell noticed something crucial. Chen kept glancing toward the prosecution table before answering questions, as if seeking approval or guidance. "Ms. Chen, these documents show Detective Harrison's signature on several irregular reports. Are you certain these signatures are authentic?" Chen nodded quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Yes, I processed these reports personally." Sarah Mitchell approached the witness stand with a document. "Ms. Chen, I'm showing you what has been marked as Defense Exhibit A. This is Detective Harrison's official signature card from his personnel file. Would you please compare this signature to the ones on the reports in question?" For the first time, Chen looked genuinely nervous. She studied the documents for a long moment, and her confidence seemed to evaporate. They appear similar. Similar, Ms. Chen. You just testified that you were certain these signatures were authentic. Are you now saying they only appear similar? Judge Sterling intervened before Chen could answer. "Counselor, I think we've established the witness's expertise regarding the signatures. But the damage was done. The gallery had seen the uncertainty, and several reporters made notes about the exchange. More importantly, Sarah Mitchell had succeeded in planting doubt about the authenticity of key evidence. As the court adjourned for the day, Harrison felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. The prosecution's case was showing cracks, but he knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. The weight of the accusations still pressed down on him, but for the first time since the trial began, he allowed himself to believe that truth might have a chance to emerge. Sarah Mitchell gathered her papers with renewed energy. She had found the weak points in the prosecution's armor, and she intended to exploit them. But she also knew that she was fighting against more than just legal procedures. There seemed to be forces at work that wanted this case resolved quickly and definitively, regardless of what the evidence actually showed. The evening news coverage focused on the day's dramatic moments, but most commentators still predicted a conviction. However, a few legal analysts noted the unusual nature of some of the testimony and wondered if the case might be more complicated than it initially appeared. As Detective Harrison drove home through the familiar streets of Hartford, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was caught in something much larger than a simple misconduct case. The precision of the accusations, the timing of the evidence, and the eagerness of everyone involved to see him convicted suggested a coordinated effort that went beyond normal legal procedures. What he didn't know was that someone had been watching the trial closely, someone who possessed information that could change everything, and that someone was preparing to take action that would shake the very foundations of the case against him. The third day of the trial began with an electric tension that seemed to charge the very air in the courtroom. Word had spread overnight about the inconsistencies discovered in the prosecution's evidence, and the media coverage had taken on a slightly different tone. While most outlets still predicted Detective Harrison's conviction, a few legal commentators had begun questioning whether the case was as straightforward as initially believed. Judge Sterling entered the courtroom with a stern expression that suggested he was not pleased with the previous day's developments. District Attorney Coleman appeared more focused than ever, clearly determined to regain control of the narrative. She had spent the entire evening reviewing her remaining evidence and preparing her witnesses to withstand more aggressive cross-examination. Sarah Mitchell arrived with a renewed sense of purpose. Her investigation into the case files had continued through the night, and she had discovered several more discrepancies that she intended to present. Detective Harrison sat beside her, looking more hopeful than he had since the trial began, but still carrying the weight of uncertainty about his future. "Your Honor," Coleman announced, "the prosecution calls financial analyst Robert Kim to the stand." Kim was supposed to be the prosecution's closing witness, the expert who would tie together all the financial irregularities that supposedly implicated Detective Harrison. His testimony was expected to be highly technical and devastating to the defense. As he took the stand, the courtroom fell silent, knowing that this could be the testimony that sealed Harrison's fate. "Mr. Kim, you've reviewed Detective Harrison's financial records over the past 2 years. What did your analysis reveal?" Kim opened his briefcase and pulled out several charts and graphs. "My investigation showed several unusual deposits and expenditures that coincided with the time periods mentioned in previous testimony. There are clear patterns that suggest irregular income sources." Sarah Mitchell studied her notes as Kim continued his testimony, but something about his presentation troubled her. The financial data seemed almost too perfectly aligned with the prosecution's timeline. In her experience, real financial investigations usually revealed messy, complicated patterns that required extensive analysis to understand. Kim's charts showed clear, obvious connections that seemed almost manufactured. As the morning progressed, Kim's testimony became increasingly detailed and damaging. He spoke of hidden accounts, suspicious transactions, and financial behavior that he claimed was consistent with someone involved in inappropriate activities. The gallery listened intently, and even some of Harrison's supporters began to look worried. But just as Kim was reaching the climax of his testimony, describing what he called the most damaging evidence, the courtroom doors burst open with such force that everyone turned to look. What they saw defied all expectations and brought the proceedings to a complete halt. A German shepherd bounded into the courtroom, his powerful legs carrying him swiftly down the center aisle. The dog was magnificent, clearly well-trained and purposeful in his movements. Court security moved to intercept him, but something about the animal's behavior gave them pause. He wasn't acting aggressively or chaotically. Instead, he moved with the precision and focus of a working dog on a mission. Judge Sterling hammered his gavel repeatedly. "Bailiff, remove that animal immediately." But before anyone could act, the dog had reached the defense table. Detective Harrison's eyes widened in recognition and disbelief. "Rex," he whispered. The German shepherd looked up at his former partner with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to communicate something urgent and important. Rex had been Harrison's K9 partner for 5 years before being reassigned to another handler 6 months ago. During their time together, they had developed the kind of bond that only exists between working partners who trust each other completely. Rex had been trained for drug detection and search and rescue, and his performance record was exemplary. The courtroom erupted in confusion. Reporters stood up to get better photos. Spectators craned their necks to see what was happening, and court officials rushed to restore order. But Rex remained focused on his mission. He approached Sarah Mitchell and dropped something at her feet, a sealed envelope that looked as if it had been carefully protected from the elements. "What is the meaning of this?" Judge Sterling demanded, his face red with indignation. "This is a court of law, not a circus." Sarah Mitchell looked down at the envelope, then at Rex, who sat perfectly still beside the defense table. His training was evident in every line of his posture. This was not a random interruption, but a deliberate action. She reached down and picked up the envelope, noticing that it was addressed in handwriting she didn't recognize. "Your Honor," Sarah said carefully, "this animal was Detective Harrison's K9 partner. German shepherds of his caliber are trained to follow specific protocols and respond to particular situations. His presence here and his behavior suggest this might be relevant to the case." District Attorney Coleman was on her feet immediately. "Objection. This is clearly a publicity stunt designed to manipulate the jury and disrupt these proceedings. There's no legal basis for accepting whatever this envelope contains." But Judge Sterling, despite his obvious irritation, found himself in an unusual situation. Rex continued to sit perfectly still, his attention focused on the envelope now in Sarah Mitchell's hands. The dog's behavior was so professional and purposeful that it was difficult to dismiss as a random occurrence. "Counselor Mitchell, what do you propose we do with this evidence?" the judge asked, his tone suggesting he was looking for a way to maintain control of his courtroom while not completely dismissing what might be relevant information. Sarah Mitchell looked at the envelope more carefully. It was sealed with tape and appeared to have been protected from weather and handling. The address was written in careful block letters, and it was addressed to the defense attorney for Detective Michael Harrison, Hartford County Courthouse. "Your Honor, I request a brief recess to examine the contents of this envelope. If it contains relevant information to this case, it should be properly evaluated. If it doesn't, we can continue with the proceedings." The courtroom buzzed with excited conversation. This was the kind of dramatic moment that legal dramas were made of, but it was happening in real life. Cameras flashed as reporters captured images of Rex sitting calmly beside the defense table, his mission apparently complete. Judge Sterling considered his options. The unusual nature of the situation made it difficult to simply dismiss, particularly given Rex's professional training and his connection to the defendant. After a long pause, he made his decision. "The court will take a 30-minute recess. Counselor Mitchell, you may examine the contents of the envelope in the presence of the prosecution and a court officer. If it contains relevant evidence, we will determine how to proceed. If not, we continue with Mr. Kim's testimony." As the courtroom cleared for recess, Rex remained beside the defense table, his duty apparently fulfilled. Detective Harrison knelt down beside his former partner, running his hands through the dog's thick coat. "Good boy, Rex. I don't know how you got here or what this is about, but thank you." In a private conference room, Sarah Mitchell carefully opened the envelope while District Attorney Coleman and Court Officer James Murphy looked on. Inside was a handwritten letter several pages long, along with what appeared to be photocopies of documents. As Sarah began to read, her eyes widened in surprise. The letter was signed by Emma Rodriguez, a witness who had been expected to testify for the prosecution but had disappeared 3 weeks earlier. Everyone involved in the case had assumed she had been intimidated or had chosen not to cooperate. According to the prosecution, her absence was not significant because other witnesses had provided similar testimony. But the letter told a different story entirely. Emma Rodriguez wrote that she had not disappeared by choice, but had been advised to leave town for her safety after she had tried to tell investigators that the evidence against Detective Harrison had been fabricated. She explained that she had witnessed several meetings where documents had been altered and testimonies had been coordinated to ensure Harrison's conviction. More shocking were the photocopied documents she had included. These were original versions of some of the key evidence against Harrison, showing significant differences from the versions presented in court. Signatures had been altered, dates had been changed, and entire sections of reports had been rewritten. District Attorney Coleman read over the documents with growing concern. If these were authentic, they suggested that her entire case had been built on fabricated evidence, but she also noticed something that troubled her even more. She herself had never seen the original versions of these documents. They had been provided to her office by investigators, and she had accepted them as authentic without conducting her own verification. "This is obviously fake," Coleman said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Anyone could create documents like these and claim they're originals. We have no way to verify their authenticity." Sarah Mitchell continued reading Emma Rodriguez's letter. The witness explained that she had tried to contact multiple people about what she had discovered, but each attempt had been met with threats and warnings to stay silent. Finally, realizing that Detective Harrison's trial was proceeding without the truth being told, she had entrusted the letter to the one individual she knew could get it to the right place, Rex, who had been trained to find people and deliver items safely. The implications were staggering. If Emma Rodriguez's account was accurate, Detective Harrison was not guilty of misconduct, but was instead the victim of an elaborate frame-up. But the letter raised even more disturbing questions. Who had the power and motivation to orchestrate such a scheme? And why had they targeted Harrison specifically? As the recess ended and court resumed, the atmosphere in the room had changed completely. Word had leaked about the contents of Emma Rodriguez's letter, and speculation ran wild among the spectators and media. Judge Sterling returned to his bench, looking more serious than anyone had seen him during the entire trial. The stage was set for revelations that would shake not only Detective Harrison's case, but potentially the entire Hartford County legal system. Rex had delivered more than just a letter. He had brought the possibility of justice to a courtroom where truth had been buried under layers of deception and manipulation. The courtroom atmosphere had transformed from one of routine legal proceedings to electric anticipation, as Judge Sterling resumed his position at the bench. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls despite the bailiff's protests. News of the mysterious letter had spread beyond the courthouse, and local television stations were broadcasting live updates to audiences across Connecticut. Sarah Mitchell stood to address the court, holding Emma Rodriguez's letter with hands that trembled slightly despite her years of experience. This was the kind of moment that could either vindicate her client completely or destroy what remained of his reputation if the evidence proved unreliable. Your Honor, the defense requests permission to present new evidence that has come to light regarding this case. This evidence suggests that Detective Harrison has been the victim of a systematic campaign designed to destroy his career and reputation. District Attorney Coleman rose immediately. Objection, Your Honor. This alleged evidence appeared under highly suspicious circumstances and has not been properly authenticated. We cannot allow the defense to introduce unverified documents simply because they arrived in a dramatic fashion. Judge Sterling studied both attorneys carefully. His usual eagerness to move the proceedings along seemed to have been replaced by genuine concern about the implications of what was unfolding. Counselor Mitchell, please summarize the nature of this evidence for the court. Sarah Mitchell took a deep breath. Your Honor, we have received a detailed statement from Emma Rodriguez, a witness who the prosecution claimed was unavailable for testimony. Ms. Rodriguez states that she did not disappear voluntarily, but was forced to leave town after she discovered evidence that documents in this case had been fabricated and testimonies had been coordinated to ensure Detective Harrison's conviction. A murmur ran through the courtroom like wildfire. Several reporters rushed out to file immediate updates, while others remained glued to their seats, not wanting to miss a moment of what was becoming the most dramatic trial in Hartford County history. Furthermore, Sarah continued, Ms. Rodriguez has provided what she claims are original versions of key documents presented in this case, showing significant alterations from the versions we have seen in court. Judge Sterling's expression grew increasingly serious. Ms. Coleman, how does the prosecution respond to these allegations? Coleman looked visibly shaken, but maintained her professional composure. Your Honor, these are serious accusations that require proper investigation. However, I must point out that my office received all evidence in this case through proper channels and had no reason to question its authenticity. If there have been irregularities, the prosecution has been as much a victim as anyone else. This statement caught many observers by surprise. Rather than immediately dismissing the defense's claims, Coleman seemed to be acknowledging the possibility that something was wrong with the case. Her response suggested that she might not have been aware of any fabrication if it had indeed occurred. Sarah Mitchell seized on this opening. Your Honor, the defense requests that the court immediately halt proceedings to allow for a proper forensic examination of all evidence in this case. If Ms. Rodriguez's allegations are true, then Detective Harrison is not only innocent of the charges against him, but has been the victim of a serious conspiracy. Conspiracy is a strong word, Counselor, Judge Sterling cautioned, but his tone suggested he was taking the allegations seriously. Perhaps it is, Your Honor, but the evidence suggests a coordinated effort involving multiple parties to frame an innocent man. The precision of the fabrication, the timing of witness testimony, and the systematic nature of the alleged evidence manipulation all point to something far more organized than simple misconduct. Officer Rebecca Torres, who had been attending the trial as an observer, stood up in the gallery. Your Honor, may I address the court? Judge Sterling looked surprised by the interruption. Officer Torres, this is highly irregular. I understand, Your Honor, but I have information relevant to Ms. G. Rodriguez's allegations. I worked with Detective Harrison for 2 years, and I began noticing inconsistencies in this case from the first day of testimony. With your permission, I'd like to share what I've observed. Coleman objected immediately, but Judge Sterling overruled her. The unprecedented nature of the situation seemed to call for unprecedented flexibility in courtroom procedure. Officer Torres stepped forward, her uniform crisp and her bearing professional. Your Honor, several of the incidents described in testimony supposedly occurred during times when I was working directly with Detective Harrison. The prosecution's version of events doesn't match my personal observations or official records from those dates. She pulled out a small notebook that officers typically carried for recording observations. On March 15th, The prosecution claimed Detective Harrison missed an important briefing to attend an unauthorized meeting. But according to my notes and the station's log, he was with me that entire day investigating a missing person case. We filed reports together and interviewed witnesses. I can provide the case number and contact information for the people we spoke with. The courtroom erupted in excited conversation. Sarah Mitchell felt a surge of vindication, while Coleman looked increasingly concerned about the foundation of her case. Judge Sterling called for order. Officer Torres, do you have documentation to support your statements? Yes, Your Honor. I have duty logs, case files, and witness contact information. I also have photographs from that day's investigation that are time-stamped and geotagged. Sarah Mitchell requested permission to review Officer Torres's documentation, and after brief consideration, Judge Sterling agreed. The examination revealed detailed records that contradicted key elements of the prosecution's timeline. But the most dramatic moment came when Sarah Mitchell announced her next request. Your Honor, based on Emma Rodriguez's letter, I believe there may be additional evidence hidden in this very courthouse. Ms. Rodriguez mentioned that certain individuals involved in this conspiracy might have left evidence of their activities in places they thought would never be searched. Rex, who had been sitting quietly beside the defense table throughout the proceedings, suddenly became alert. His ears perked up, and he began showing signs of the focused behavior that indicated he had detected something significant. Your Honor, Detective Harrison said, standing up for the first time during the trial, Rex is trained in evidence detection. If there is hidden material in this courthouse, he can find it. Judge Sterling looked skeptical. Detective Harrison, this is a court of law, not a television drama. But Sarah Mitchell pressed the point. Your Honor, German Shepherds like Rex are routinely used in criminal investigations to locate hidden evidence. If there's nothing to find, we'll have lost only a few minutes. But if Mrs. Rodriguez is correct about evidence being concealed in the courthouse, Rex could locate it quickly and efficiently. The proposal was unprecedented, but so was everything else that had happened since Rex burst through the courtroom doors. After lengthy consideration and consultation with the court clerk, Judge Sterling made a decision that would be talked about in legal circles for years to come. The court will take an extended recess to allow for a limited search of the courthouse premises. This search will be conducted under strict supervision and will focus only on public areas and areas where evidence might reasonably be concealed. Rex immediately sprang into action, his training taking over as he began systematically searching the courtroom. Detective Harrison followed his former partner, reading the subtle signs that indicated when the dog was tracking something interesting. Within minutes, Rex had focused his attention on a section of the wall behind the judge's bench where several filing cabinets were located. His behavior became increasingly focused, and he began showing the specific signals that indicated he had found something significant. Court maintenance staff were called in to assist with the search. Behind one of the filing cabinets, they discovered a small digital recording device that appeared to have been hidden there for some time. The device was still functional and contained several hours of recorded conversations. Sarah Mitchell's hands shook as she held the device. If Emma Rodriguez's allegations were true, this recorder might contain evidence of the conspiracy against Detective Harrison. But it might also implicate people no one had suspected, potentially reaching into the highest levels of the local legal system. Judge Sterling examined the device carefully. This appears to be a professional-grade recording device. The court will need to determine who placed it here, when it was placed, and what it contains before we can proceed. As the implications of the discovery began to sink in, the courtroom fell silent. Rex had not only delivered Emma Rodriguez's letter, but had also uncovered physical evidence that might prove her allegations. The trial that had begun as a routine corruption case was now threatening to expose something much larger and more serious. District Attorney Coleman approached the bench. "Your Honor, I request immediate access to these recordings. If my office has been operating based on fabricated evidence, I need to know immediately." But Sarah Mitchell had a different concern. "Your Honor, if this device has been recording conversations in the courthouse, it may contain privileged attorney-client communications or other protected material. We need to establish proper protocols for reviewing its contents." The legal and ethical implications were staggering. The discovery suggested that someone had been conducting unauthorized surveillance in the courthouse itself, potentially capturing confidential conversations between attorneys and clients, judges and staff, or other privileged communications. As court officials worked to determine the next steps, Detective Harrison looked down at Rex with profound gratitude. His former partner had not only delivered evidence that might prove his innocence, but had uncovered a conspiracy that apparently reached into the very heart of the judicial system. The afternoon sun streamed through the courthouse windows as everyone involved realized they were no longer dealing with a simple misconduct case, but with something that could shake the foundations of justice in Hartford County and beyond. The Hartford County Courthouse had been transformed into something resembling a crime scene investigation unit. Technical experts from the Connecticut State Police had been called in to examine the recording device that Rex had discovered, while court officials worked to establish protocols for handling what might be the most sensitive evidence ever uncovered in the building's history. Judge Sterling had cleared the main courtroom of spectators and media, allowing only essential personnel to remain while the recordings were analyzed. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation as everyone waited to discover what conversations had been captured and who might be implicated in the conspiracy against Detective Harrison. Sarah Mitchell sat beside her client, both of them watching as technicians carefully extracted data from the hidden device. The implications of what they might hear weighed heavily on everyone present. If Emma Rodriguez's allegations were true, the recordings could expose corruption at levels no one had imagined possible. District Attorney Coleman paced nervously near the prosecution table. Her initial confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by a growing concern that she had been manipulated as much as anyone else in this case. The possibility that her office had been used as an unwitting tool in a larger conspiracy was personally and professionally devastating. "Your Honor," the lead technician announced, "we've successfully extracted approximately 47 hours of recorded conversations spanning the last 3 months. However, we need to establish guidelines for reviewing this material while protecting any privileged communications that might have been inadvertently captured." Judge Sterling nodded gravely. "We'll review the recordings with a special magistrate to identify any privileged material before proceeding with relevant evidence. This process must be handled with extreme care to protect everyone's rights while ensuring justice is served." As the technical work continued, Officer Rebecca Torres approached Sarah Mitchell with additional documentation she had gathered. "Ms. Mitchell, I've been comparing the prosecution's timeline with official police records, and there are discrepancies beyond what I mentioned in court. Several key dates in their case don't align with documented police activities." Torres spread out several files on the defense table. On April 3rd, the prosecution claims Detective Harrison was involved in a suspicious meeting downtown, but according to department records, he was actually testifying in federal court that day in the Martinez drug case. "I have court transcripts and witness testimony to prove it." Sarah Mitchell examined the documents with growing excitement. Each piece of evidence Torres provided further undermined the prosecution's case, while supporting Emma Rodriguez's allegations about fabricated evidence. Meanwhile, Rex continued to patrol the courtroom with focused intensity. His behavior suggested he might be detecting additional items of interest, though court officials were hesitant to conduct another immediate search without first processing what had already been discovered. The first breakthrough came when technicians identified a series of conversations recorded in the courthouse's private conference rooms over the past 6 weeks. Judge Sterling, accompanied by a special magistrate and representatives from both the prosecution and defense, began the careful process of reviewing the material. The first relevant recording was stunning in its clarity and implications. The conversation involved 3 voices, none of which could be immediately identified, discussing the Harrison situation and the need to ensure his conviction was achieved quickly and quietly. "The evidence package is complete," one voice said. "All the documents have been prepared and the witnesses have been briefed. There should be no surprises." A second voice responded. "And what about the Rodriguez woman? She's been asking too many questions. She's been handled. She won't be a problem anymore." The third voice, which sounded older and carried more authority, gave specific instructions. "This needs to be wrapped up before anyone starts looking too closely at the details. Harrison is just one piece of a larger puzzle. But he's the piece that could expose everything if he's not dealt with properly." Sarah Mitchell felt her heart racing as she listened to the recording. This was concrete evidence of a conspiracy, captured in the conspirators' own words. But the recording raised as many questions as it answered. Who were these people, and what was the larger puzzle they referenced? Judge Sterling paused the playback. "This recording appears to confirm Ms. Rodriguez's allegations about a coordinated effort to frame Detective Harrison. We need to continue reviewing the material to identify the speakers and understand the full scope of what we're dealing with." As they continued through the recordings, a pattern began to emerge. The conversations revealed a systematic effort to manipulate evidence, coordinate witness testimony, and ensure Harrison's conviction. But they also revealed something more disturbing. Harrison appeared to have been targeted not for what he had done, but for what he might discover. One recording captured a particularly revealing exchange. "Harrison's been getting too close to the waterfront development project. His partner Torres has been asking questions too, but she's not as much of a threat yet." Another voice responded, "The development is worth too much to let one detective compromise everything. If Harrison starts connecting the dots between the zoning approvals and the city council votes, we're all finished." Sarah Mitchell and Detective Harrison exchanged glances. The waterfront development project had been one of the biggest stories in Hartford over the past year, involving millions of dollars in city contracts and significant changes to zoning laws. Harrison had been investigating some irregularities in connection with the project, but he had never imagined it was connected to his current legal troubles. The recordings continued to reveal layers of corruption involving city officials, development contractors, and what appeared to be systematic manipulation of public contracts. Detective Harrison's investigation into minor irregularities had apparently threatened to expose a much larger network of illegal activities. But the most shocking revelation came in a recording that featured a familiar voice, one that made everyone in the room freeze in recognition. Judge Sterling's face went pale as he heard his own voice captured in conversation with unknown individuals. "The Harrison trial needs to move quickly," the recorded voice of Judge Sterling said. "We can't allow the defense to drag this out with unnecessary delays or extensive cross-examinations." Another voice responded, "You've been very helpful in managing the proceedings. Once Harrison is convicted, there won't be anyone left to investigate the development project." The real Judge Sterling sat in stunned silence as he listened to what appeared to be his own voice discussing the manipulation of Harrison's trial. But something about the recording troubled him deeply. He had no memory of these conversations, and some of the phrases used didn't match his typical speech patterns. "Stop the recording," Judge Sterling commanded. I need to consult with technical experts immediately. Something is very wrong here. Court technicians were brought in to analyze the specific recording featuring Judge Sterling's voice. After careful examination using voice analysis software, they made a startling discovery. The conversation appeared to be artificially constructed using voice samples that had been digitally manipulated to create fake dialogue. Your Honor, the lead technician explained, this recording shows clear signs of digital manipulation. Someone used samples of your actual voice, probably taken from court proceedings, and artificially created conversations that never actually occurred. The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. Not only had Detective Harrison been framed with fabricated evidence, but the conspiracy had extended to creating fake recordings designed to implicate Judge Sterling as well. The level of sophistication required for such manipulation suggested they were dealing with individuals or organizations with significant technical resources and expertise. Sarah Mitchell realized the full scope of what they were facing. Your Honor, if they could create fake voice recordings of you, they could have fabricated any of the evidence in Detective Harrison's case. We're not just dealing with document forgery, but with advanced technological manipulation designed to destroy anyone who threatens their interests. Emma Rodriguez's letter had mentioned threats and intimidation, but the discovery of artificially manipulated voice recordings revealed a conspiracy with capabilities far beyond what anyone had imagined. Whoever was behind the framing of Detective Harrison had access to technology and resources that suggested connections to organized crime, or potentially even foreign intelligence operations. District Attorney Coleman approached the bench with obvious distress. Your Honor, I request immediate suspension of this trial pending a full investigation by state and federal authorities. If my office has been unknowingly prosecuting cases based on fabricated evidence, we need to examine every case that might have been affected. As the afternoon wore on, more recordings were analyzed, revealing additional layers of the conspiracy. Names began to emerge. City council members, development contractors, and individuals with connections to the waterfront project. Each revelation painted a picture of systematic corruption that made Detective Harrison's case seem small by comparison. Rex remained alert throughout the proceedings, his trained senses apparently detecting that the investigation was far from over. His successful uncovering of the recording device had opened a door that could not be closed, leading to discoveries that would ultimately reshape the entire Hartford County legal and political landscape. The conspiracy against Detective Michael Harrison was beginning to unravel, but those responsible were not likely to surrender without a fight. As evidence mounted against them, the danger to everyone involved in exposing the truth was only increasing. The final day of what had become the most extraordinary trial in Hartford County history dawned crisp and clear. The courthouse was surrounded by media trucks from across New England, federal investigators, and crowds of citizens who had followed the unfolding drama. What had begun as the prosecution of a single detective had evolved into the exposure of a corruption network that reached into every level of Hartford's government and business community. Judge Sterling entered the courtroom with a completely different demeanor than he had shown throughout the trial. The discovery of the fabricated voice recordings had not only cleared him of any wrongdoing, but had made him a victim of the same conspiracy that had targeted Detective Harrison. His determination to see justice served was now personal as well as professional. Sarah Mitchell sat at the defense table reviewing the mountain of evidence that had been uncovered over the past week. Federal investigators had worked around the clock to analyze the recordings, trace the source of the fabricated evidence, and identify the individuals involved in the conspiracy. The results were staggering in their scope and implications. Detective Harrison appeared more relaxed than he had since the trial began, but he remained cautious. Rex sat beside him. the German Shepherd having become something of a celebrity hero whose discovery of the hidden recording device had triggered one of the largest corruption investigations in Connecticut's history. District Attorney Coleman stood to address the court, her face showing the strain of the past week's revelations. Your Honor, based on the evidence uncovered during this trial, the state of Connecticut hereby moves to dismiss all charges against Detective Michael Harrison. The prosecution acknowledges that Detective Harrison is not only innocent of the charges brought against him, but has been the victim of a systematic conspiracy designed to silence his legitimate investigation into municipal corruption. The courtroom erupted in applause, but Judge Sterling called for order before continuing with the formal proceedings. Furthermore, Coleman continued, I want to publicly apologize to Detective Harrison, his family, and this community for the injustice that has been perpetrated through my office. While we were unknowing participants in this conspiracy, we bear responsibility for ensuring such manipulation never occurs again. Sarah Mitchell rose to respond. Your Honor, Detective Harrison accepts the state's apology and appreciates District Attorney Coleman's commitment to reform. However, we believe this case demonstrates the need for systematic changes to prevent such conspiracies from succeeding in the future. At that moment, the courtroom doors opened, and a figure that many thought they would never see entered quietly. Emma Rodriguez walked down the aisle, looking tired but determined. Her appearance sent a wave of excitement through the gallery, as her testimony would provide the final piece of the puzzle that had consumed Hartford County for weeks. Emma Rodriguez took the witness stand with the poise of someone who had endured significant hardship but refused to be silenced. Her testimony provided a comprehensive account of how she had discovered the conspiracy against Detective Harrison and the lengths to which the conspirators had gone to keep her quiet. I worked as an administrative assistant for Hartwell Development Corporation, Rodriguez began. Part of my job involved maintaining correspondence and documentation for the Waterfront Development Project. In March, I began noticing irregularities in the files, documents that seemed to have been altered, signatures that looked suspicious, and communications that didn't match the official project timeline. She continued, when I started asking questions, I was told to mind my own business and focus on my regular duties, but I couldn't ignore what I was seeing, especially when I realized that Detective Harrison was investigating some of the same irregularities I had noticed. Rodriguez's testimony revealed the sophisticated nature of the conspiracy. The Waterfront Development Project was worth over $200 million and involved rezoning significant portions of Hartford's downtown area. City council members had received substantial benefits for approving the zoning changes, while development contractors had inflated costs and diverted funds to personal accounts. Detective Harrison wasn't supposed to be investigating the development project, Rodriguez explained. His original assignment was a routine audit of municipal contracts. But his thorough approach led him to discover connections between seemingly unrelated irregularities. When the conspirators realized how close he was getting to exposing everything, they decided to neutralize him by destroying his credibility and career. The fabricated evidence against Harrison had been created by a team of specialists hired by the development company. They had access to advanced document forgery techniques, voice manipulation technology, and sufficient insider knowledge to create a convincing case that would satisfy cursory review. They never expected anyone to examine the evidence as closely as Ms. Mitchell did, Rodriguez continued. The plan was for Detective Harrison to be convicted quickly and quietly, discrediting any investigation he might have conducted and serving as a warning to other officers who might ask too many questions. Rex's role in uncovering the conspiracy had been unintentional but crucial. The German Shepherd had been trained to locate hidden objects and people. and his natural loyalty to Harrison had led him to seek out evidence that might help his former partner. The recording device he had discovered contained conversations that the conspirators had never intended to preserve. Captured accidentally when they met in areas of the courthouse they thought were private. Federal investigators had spent the past week following the evidence trail revealed by the recordings. Arrests had been made at every level of the conspiracy, from city council members to development contractors to the specialists who had created the fraudulent evidence. The waterfront development project had been suspended pending a complete investigation of all contracts and approvals. Judge Sterling addressed the courtroom with obvious emotion. This case has demonstrated both the vulnerability and the strength of our judicial system. While it was temporarily manipulated by sophisticated criminals, the truth ultimately emerged through the dedication of legal professionals, the loyalty of a well-trained police dog, and the courage of citizens like Mr. Rodriguez who refused to be silenced. He continued, "Detective Harrison, you have been completely vindicated, not only of the charges brought against you, but in your dedication to honest law enforcement. Your investigation, which the conspirators sought to stop, has ultimately exposed corruption that might have continued indefinitely without your diligence." Detective Harrison stood to address the court for the first time since the trial began. "Your Honor, I want to thank everyone who believed in my innocence and worked to uncover the truth. This experience has been difficult, but it has also shown me the importance of persistence in the face of injustice and the value of having allies, both human and canine, who refuse to give up." He looked down at Rex, who had remained faithfully beside him throughout the ordeal. This case could never have been solved without Rex's intervention. His training and loyalty proved that sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected sources. The formal exoneration of Detective Harrison was accompanied by a commitment from Connecticut state authorities to implement new safeguards against evidence manipulation and conspiracy. The Hartford Police Department announced that Harrison would be promoted and given additional resources to continue investigating municipal corruption. Sarah Mitchell addressed the gathered media after the proceedings concluded. "This case demonstrates the importance of thorough legal representation and the dangers of accepting evidence without proper verification. We hope the reforms that result from this experience will prevent similar injustices in the future." The waterfront development conspiracy had involved over 30 individuals and resulted in the recovery of millions of dollars in misappropriated public funds. The techniques used to frame Detective Harrison had apparently been employed in other cases across multiple states, leading to a federal task force investigation that would continue for years. Emma Rodriguez was offered protective services and compensation for the hardships she had endured. Her courage in coming forward had not only saved Detective Harrison's career, but had exposed a corruption network that had been operating with impunity for over 2 years. As the sun set over Hartford County, Detective Harrison and Rex walked through the city streets they had patrolled together for so many years. The vindication felt good, but more important was the knowledge that their work had made a real difference in protecting the community they served. The conspiracy against Detective Michael Harrison had ultimately failed, brought down by the very qualities it had sought to destroy: integrity, loyalty, and an unwillingness to accept injustice. The partnership between a dedicated police officer and his faithful canine companion had proven stronger than the most sophisticated criminal conspiracy, demonstrating that truth and justice, while sometimes challenged, ultimately prevail. Rex trotted beside his partner with the satisfied air of a job well done, his tail wagging as they walked toward a future where their work together would continue protecting the people of Hartford County. Dear viewers, we hope Detective Harrison and Rex's incredible story of justice and loyalty has moved you deeply. This tale of corruption exposed and truth triumphant reminds us that sometimes heroes come in the most unexpected forms, and that integrity will always find a way to prevail over deception. If this remarkable journey touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity of life, the power of truth, and the unbreakable bonds that define us. Don't miss our upcoming content featuring more inspiring tales of courage and justice. We'd love to hear your thoughts about Detective Harrison and Rex's amazing partnership in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey, and we look forward to sharing more captivating stories with you soon.